Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. Happy St. Patrick's Day. President Trump hosted German Chancellor Angela Merkel at the White House this afternoon. Both leaders offered to work together where interests align and gave public recognition to areas of cooperation, especially in Afghanistan and Ukraine. But it was President Trump pointing to a possible shared experience that raised eyebrows and produced even more questions on a story that has consumed the White House for 2 weeks. Correspondent Kevin Cork is on the North Lawn tonight with the latest. Good evening, Kevin.
Hey, good evening, Brett, and happy St. Patrick's Day to you and to all of our viewers out there. The uncommon presidency of Donald J. Trump taking another interesting turn today as the current commander-in-chief seemed to take a not-so-subtle jab at a former president right in front of a key ally.
As far as wiretapping, I guess, by, this past administration, at least we have something in common, perhaps.
In many ways, it was the irony of ironies. There he was, the president, fielding questions about claims the White House repeated that former President Obama used the UK's spy agency, the GCHQ, to eavesdrop on him after the 2016 election, all while standing right next to the German chancellor, whose phone was in fact tapped by the NSA under President Obama.
All we did was quote a certain very talented legal mind who was the one responsible for saying that on television. I didn't make an opinion on it.
The explosive claim picked up by White House officials after listening to Fox's senior legal analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano.
3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News that President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA, he didn't use the CIA, he didn't use the FBI, and he didn't use the Department of Justice. He used GCHQ. What the heck is GCHQ? That's the initials for the British spying agency.
However, the Fox News division was never able to match the claim. But that didn't stop White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer from repeating it.
Judge Andrew Napolitano made the following statement, quote, 3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News.
That claim has since reverberated across the globe, all the way to 10 Downing Street, where today a spokesman for British Prime Minister Theresa May said, "We've made clear to the administration that these claims are ridiculous and they should be ignored, and we've received assurances that these allegations will not be repeated." The wiretapping story, part of a wide-ranging news conference that included discussion about the future role of the U.S. in NATO, the 28-country defense alliance that includes Germany.
I reiterated to Chancellor Merkel my strong support for NATO, as well as the need for our NATO allies to pay their fair share for the cost of defense.
That theme of fairness to America continued in the president's comments on trade, which he suggested enriched our trading partners at the expense of American workers.
All I want is fairness. Germany's done very well in its trade deals with the United States.
Of course, Brett, the two leaders will get a chance to meet face-to-face once again. That happening this summer in July at the G20, hosted by Chancellor Merkel and the Germans. Brett.
We'll have much more on all of this with the panel. Kevin, the Secret Service is under fire tonight for 2 separate incidents involving the White House. What about that?
Well, I tell you, it's really not a very good story for them. The first of those 2 stories, Brett, actually beginning right here in Washington, where sources tell Fox News that jumped the fence here at the White House on Friday, a guy by the name of Jonathan Tran, who had 2 cans of mace on him, actually may have jiggled a door to the executive mansion. And what's worse, he may have been on the ground for at least 16 minutes before being detected. Tran is facing multiple charges. Meanwhile, in New York, an investigation is also underway into the whereabouts of a Secret Service laptop computer that was stolen. It could include floor plans to Trump Tower and information about the investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server. Now, the agent in question reportedly left a bag containing the laptop in her driveway in Brooklyn. A spokesperson for the agency says the laptops are encrypted and are not permitted to contain classified information. But as you can well imagine, Brett, that's also raising the ire of lawmakers on Capitol Hill, some of whom are already tonight calling for an investigation. Brett?
Especially after the history of the Secret Service in recent years. Kevin, thank you.
You bet.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's first trip to Asia is making waves as the chief diplomat says nothing is off the table in dealing with tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Correspondent Rich Edson reports from the demilitarized zone on the border between North and South Korea.
A few feet into the North Korean side of the demilitarized zone, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson refused to rule out U.S. allies South Korea and Japan obtaining nuclear weapons to counter North Korea.
Are these options on the table, nuclearization of the peninsula, as was discussed during the campaign?
We are exchanging views, as I did in Japan with Prime Minister Abe. This afternoon I'll be exchanging views with the leadership of the Republic of Korea as well as to our views on various approaches that can be taken.
But not ruling out either of those options, sir?
Nothing has been taken off the table.
Before meeting South Korea's interim president and foreign minister, Tillerson toured the joint security area, territory shared in the DMZ where North and South Korean forces stand feet from one another.
It was important to come up here to get as close as we could to this line between North Korea and South Korea. I think to reinforce the strength of our alliance.
On this trip to Japan, South Korea, and eventually China, Tillerson has proclaimed the era of strategic patience with North Korea as over, and U.S. partners need a new approach. At a later press conference, Tillerson also left open the option of military force.
If North Korea takes actions that threatens the South Korean forces or our own forces, then that will be met with an appropriate response. If they elevate the threat of their weapons program to a level that we believe requires action, that option is on the table.
Tillerson stressed the U.S. wants to avoid a military conflict. The secretary now turns his attention to North Korea's ally, China. He travels there this weekend and brings with him a message that China needs to further curb the North's actions, claiming the Chinese government has reacted inappropriately to the increasing threat.
For more than 60 years, this was the primary threat. North Korea is just right behind me. Though now it's just one of many vulnerabilities as North Korea continues developing its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program. Brett?
Rich Edson traveling with the secretary on the border with North Korea. Rich, thank you. Tensions also high tonight in Israel. Syria fired missiles at Israeli warplanes following Israeli airstrikes inside Syria. The Israeli army says aerial defense systems intercepted one of the missiles, but would not say whether any other missiles hit anything inside Israel, adding the safety of Israeli civilians and aircraft was not compromised. A Syrian military statement said 4 Israeli warplanes violated Syrian airspace. Thursday, in part 1 of our Debt Rising series, we told you the deadline for Congress to raise the debt ceiling had come and gone Wednesday, but Treasury Department actions have delayed what it is expected to be another political standoff. In part 2, we look at the consequences for continued inaction and what, if anything, can be done to fix the rising debt.
I am sending Congress a budget that rebuilds the military.
While his administration's budget reflects a scaling back of several agencies, President Trump, in his recent joint address to Congress, did not spend time detailing plans on how to manage the national debt, now creeping toward $20 trillion with a T, or how to reduce the annual deficits that add up to create that debt.
I'm worried that the problem is getting worse, both because we've waited too long to make changes, that the numbers continue to get worse, and the partisanship in this town is leading both parties to compete over who can be more fiscally irresponsible, and that's a very dangerous game.
All of this has real-world consequences on your wallet and the U.S. economy as a whole. Consider this. The government debt as a percentage of our gross domestic product in the U.S. is about 77%. Just 2 years ago, it was 73%. This is the apportioned debt economists say is held by the public, bought and sold on the open market that determines interest rates. By that measure, our debt is projected to rise to 89% of GDP within the decade. And by 2035, the Congressional Budget Office predicts it will rise to an all-time record of 106% of GDP, exceeding the all-time high set in World War II. The debt limit does not authorize new spending commitments. It just allows the government to fund existing budget obligations that Congresses and presidents of both parties have already made. The Trump administration this week laid out its own ambitious agenda, its budget blueprint. On the campaign trail, it was a familiar refrain from both major candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, promising their economic plans would not add to the national debt, raising eyebrows from skeptical economists. Think of it as a big cake. President Trump's ingredients likely will include a $4.5 trillion tax cut, a major infrastructure investment, along with deregulation, energy, and trade overhauls, all things he says will supercharge the U.S. economy. But tax experts predict to make that all happen will require trillions more in federal borrowing. And if true, our national debt cake will only add layers. Put another way, if the U.S. economy starts to cook, inflation would go up, and then interest rates would have to be raised as well. If interest rates rise just 1% more than current projections, the interest the U.S. pays on the current $20 trillion national debt would be $632 billion. That's $50 billion more than the current defense budget. Over 10 years, that 1% interest hike would make for a $1.6 trillion increase in what we pay out in interest on the national debt. Who holds our debt? The top holders are actually U.S. citizens and American entities such as state and local governments, pension funds, mutual funds, and the Federal Reserve. Together, they own 69%, or $13 trillion of the national debt. Foreign nations hold 31% of the total debt. Japan is now the largest foreign holder of debt with $1.1 trillion, followed closely by China with just more than $1 trillion. Trump aides acknowledge their budget will add short-term debt, but they say that's a good thing, arguing that spurring economic growth will produce more tax revenue to pay back the debt, the so-called supply-side argument. White House officials insist the nation's annual deficits and overall debt will remain, quote, manageable relative to the overall economy.
Much of the money is going into entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, and that means that we're not seeing investments in productive activity, which affects jobs and wages. I think there are huge consequences for Americans.
Some lawmakers argue for a dollar-for-dollar discipline, binding deficit reduction plans with any increase in the debt ceiling, while others on Capitol Hill say debt ceiling increases should be paired with overhauling Social Security and Medicare, programs that eat up the largest part of the federal budget.
A real program for reducing the long-run debt has to be bipartisan, and it has to be the kind of program where everybody gets a little bit hurt so that we stave off a much bigger catastrophe.
Let's talk more about the debt, budgets, and the Trump administration. Joining me now from the North Lawn of the White House, Mick Mulvaney, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Thank you for being here. I want to start with your reaction to the reaction of your rollout of the budget. You expected, as a former member of Congress, and a conservative one at that, I'm sure to get pushback on all sides.
Well, sure. Keep in mind, and I've been a member of Congress. I had my own constituency. I represented 700,000 people back in South Carolina. And I know that every member of Congress in the House and Senate has the groups back home that they feel like they need to take care of. And that's fine. There's also a lot more special interests at play on the Hill than there are other places. A lot more lobbying, for example. What I tell people is this. The president represents everybody. He represents the entire nation. And that's who this budget was written for. This was not a budget that was written in consultation with special interests or with lobbyists or with many members of Congress. This is a national budget from a national representative in the form of the president. So we're very pleased with the way it turned out.
It's interesting that you say that. You represent everyone. Democrats, including Senator Schumer's office, putting out a series of headlines. AP, many Trump voters would feel program cuts in budget proposal. The Atlantic, Trump's budget could hurt manufacturing and innovation. Boston Globe, Trump's budget cuts hit his base, rural voters. They're making the case that the budget as written now, as proposed, really goes to the essential Trump voter who elected this president. Your response?
Nothing could be further from the truth. Of course, nothing surprises me coming from those sources. Many of those sources, first of all, of course, Senator Schumer, are always going to be unhappy when the government spends less. They want the government to spend more. They want to have more control over your life and over mine, and that's how they do it. They tax more and they want to spend more, or in this case, borrow more. We targeted programs that sound great, but that don't work. I told the president today, he asked me about a couple of programs programs. And I said, Mr. President, you could go to one of your rallies in Ohio with 35,000 people and ask if any of these programs have ever helped anybody, and no one would raise their hand. So these are programs that sound great, many of them Democrat programs, many of them 30 years old, never been reviewed in a long time, or when they are reviewed, they're just not producing any results, and that's exactly where this president wanted to reduce spending.
How do you deal with the big numbers if you're not going to touch long-term entitlement reform?
Well, and again, we'll get to long-term entitlement reform discussions along with tax reform discussions, revenue flows, larger policy decisions in the fuller budget that we will roll out in May. This budget yesterday was just the spending budget, what we call the blueprint, the budget blueprint. It's the first step in the traditional appropriations process that will now go to Congress. But certainly we will be looking at all of those things as we try to figure out how to solve the problem you just mentioned, which is that we have tremendous risk. We have exposed ourselves to risk as a nation by having this $20 trillion debt. If interest rates go to their 40-year historical norms, we could spend more than $1 trillion a year on interest payments, which is just debilitating. So that's one of the things that was in the back of our mind as we formulated this budget. We wanted to rebuild the military. We wanted to guard the borders. We wanted more money for things like Veterans Affairs and school choice, but we didn't want to add to that deficit. And that's why we reduced spending in other places, because the president is keenly aware of the risks that level of debt brings to the nation.
At the briefing in laying out the budget, you said this.
Regarding the question as to climate change, I think the president was fairly straightforward. We're not spending money on that anymore. We consider that to be a waste of your money.
Sierra Club obviously came out. They point to Defense Secretary Mattis and his testimony in which he says, quote, climate change can be a driver of instability, and the Department of Defense must pay attention to the potential adverse impacts generated by this phenomenon. As noted above, climate change is a challenge that requires broader whole government response. And he goes on to say, if confirmed, I will ensure the Department of Defense plays an appropriate role with such a response by addressing the national security aspects. So by saying it's a waste of taxpayer money, does that send a different message than the Defense Secretary was saying about climate change?
I don't think so. In fact, I think you just heard him say there at the end that he's going to deal with it within the Defense Department. To the extent that this issue creates defense challenges, there's plenty of money. We plussed up the Defense Department by 10%, $54 billion, one of the largest increases in modern history. So to the extent that those issues arise within the national security interest of the United States, there is money there. But go to the bigger picture. When the president ran for office, he looked people in the eye and said, look, I am not going to take your money anymore to fund this questionable climate science. And that is exactly what he's following through on. Give the president credit. What you see is what you get, and what you heard on the campaign is what you saw in this budget.
Okay, and on the flip side, you have a lot of hawks up on Capitol Hill who say this defense budget does not go far enough. Senator McCain, Mac Thornberry, a lot of them saying that because of President Obama's administration, the military was cut by 20%. While the world is dangerous, they say that they want to see a defense budget of $640 billion in fiscal year 2018. Is there a possibility that that gets changed as the administration goes forward?
Well, sure there is. Keep in mind the next step of the process is to have the House go through the appropriations process after actually they go through the budget process. But then the House will begin the spending process. And what we've communicated to the House and the Senate is very clear. The message of the budget is this. We need more money for defense. We need more money for the other items that I've identified. And we need to do that without adding to next year's deficit. If the House has a different way to do that, a better way to do that, we're more than happy to talk with them about that, because we all agree that the previous administration, the Obama administration, gutted the military, and we need to fix that. We just need to do it without adding to the debt.
All right. I've heard you as a congressman say that budgets were dead on arrival. That's what they're saying about yours. Do you buy it?
And every Congress says that about every president's budget. But the point of the matter is this. It's that top-line message. What is the overall message of this budget? We need more money for this president's priorities. We need more money to enforce the border. We need more money for school choice. We need more money for law enforcement, enforcing all of the laws on the books. Those are the priorities of this administration. But also not adding to the deficit is another priority. So that's what we did in our budget. If the House and the Senate do it a different way, that's fine. We'd be happy to negotiate with them as we go through the process. But the top-line message doesn't change. Rebuild the nation. Don't add to the deficit.
Director Mulvaney, we appreciate your time, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. Thanks very much.
Yet another government transportation project over budget by billions of dollars. We dive into wasting of your money, this time in Hawaii, after a quick break. The hard sell of the American Health Care Act is in full force. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price spoke behind closed doors to the House Republican Conference about the repeal and replace legislation today as the president expressed confidence in his ability to whip votes.
We're going to take care of people at all levels. So I just want to let the world know I am 100% in favor. These folks, and they are tough, and they love their constituents, and they love this country. These folks were no's, mostly no's.
Yes, that's correct.
Yesterday, and now every single one is a yes.
The American Health Care Act will likely be on the House floor for a vote Thursday, with members being told to expect a late night, and you'll see it here on Fox News Channel. Mixed day on Wall Street. The Dow dropped 20, the S&P 500 lost 3, the Nasdaq was up a fraction. And for the week, green across the board. The Dow was up a fraction, the S&P 500 gained 0.2, the Nasdaq rose 2/3. For the third time, a judge in New Jersey has ruled there will be no special prosecutor appointed to oversee a criminal complaint against Republican Governor Chris Christie for the George Washington Bridge lane closing scandal. The official misconduct complaint was filed in 2016 by former firefighter William Brennan, a Democrat who's running for governor in this year's election. The rejection could signal the end of a nearly 6-month legal battle. The Marine Corps is starting a new recruitment ad blitz, hoping to draw the interest of millennials by showing Marines as not only strong warriors, but also good citizens. The campaign, called Battles Won, includes clips of a Marine veteran tackling an armed robber and Marines unloading toys for TOTS boxes. The brand campaign has been in the works for months and comes as the Corps is investigating a private Facebook page where nude photos of female Marines were posted without their consent. The list of transportation boondoggles has to start with the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska. You remember that one? And the Big Dig in Boston. And now a rail project in Hawaii is heading toward a similar infamous status. Correspondent William Lajeunesse looks at your tax dollars being wasted in the 50th state.
You know, it's too late because it's already in full swing already.
Like most big projects, this one began with high hopes, vowing to solve gridlock in Honolulu.
They promised people that if we build it, you will come.
Problem was,
they lowballed the cost, then they misrepresented the benefits to traffic.
Watchdogs say it's a warning for the rest of us.
Unfortunately, the project is so far along, it's unfortunately unstoppable at this point.
The above-ground railway's projected cost $10 billion, $500 million a mile, triple what taxpayers were promised. Construction is 5 years overdue, and the temporary tax to pay for it may go on forever.
Absolutely. I think the cost containment and cost management has to be our everyday focus.
Short of cash, the city proposed cutting the track by 4 miles. If so, however, the train misses downtown entirely, and Honolulu would owe the feds $1 billion for falling short.
Right now I feel misled, but when they authorized it, it was like, okay, great.
As for congestion, when finally done, reports show the rail will only cut traffic by less than 2%.
This is a certifiable boondoggle. You don't spend $5 or $10 billion for 1 to 2% return.
The time has come for a new program of national rebuilding.
President Trump proposes spending $1 trillion on infrastructure. By including private capital, he hopes to eliminate waste.
The private sector has different incentives. They basically don't build something unless it's affordable, because if they build it and they run out of money, they go broke.
As for lessons learned, Hawaii does offer a cautionary tale. If the bank of Uncle Sam dries up, cities will need to get creative, and bringing in a private partner can increase accountability, something auditors said was lacking here. But this case does illustrate that old adage, in for a penny, in for a pound. Brett?
William Lajeunesse in Hawaii. William, thank you. The Environmental Protection Agency has awarded $100 million to help fund infrastructure upgrades in Flint, Michigan, amid the city's crisis with lead-tainted water. The city hopes the funds will help reach the goal of replacing 6,000 water pipes this year. Flint returned to Detroit's water system in 2015, but residents still must use filters or bottled water. President Trump promised to bring back coal mining jobs, and after his executive order that stopped a steam protection rule, mining companies have begun hiring again. But as senior correspondent Mike Tobin reports from Kentucky, it's a revival that may not live up to what it once was.
Carlos Sturtle is a career Kentucky coal miner. He's doing something he hasn't done in 3 years. He's mining coal.
I'm glad I'll be working. Thankful that I got a job again.
A bounce in the economy created a demand for steel. You need coal to make it. An adversary to coal moved out of the White House, and a president moved in who started rolling back regulations that crippled mining.
Well, obviously, we're more optimistic. Instead of retrenching, we're looking for new projects.
It's not a storybook ending for the coal miners. Here at the Perry County mine, since 2012, they've laid off 460 guys. In the last 2 months, they've hired back 90. Nationwide, coal companies have laid off tens of thousands. New hires are in the hundreds.
Maybe it's a little C comeback at this point. You know, we're very confident. We're very positive about everything we're seeing since the November election and President Trump taking controls of the energy agencies that regulate the industry and all.
As technology advances, equipment becomes more efficient, requiring less manpower. In the Obama years, some coal-fired power plants either shut down or built infrastructure to burn natural gas. That put coal in competition with fracking and cheap fossil fuel.
Even though that coal is coming back and there will be employment in the future, but whether it will not, unlikely to go back to where it was 10, 15 years ago.
Retail business people in little coal towns like Hazard, Kentucky are happy for any comeback, but know they'll never come all the way back.
When they started doing all the layoffs, my business went down tremendously.
The question is, are the new hires due to something tangible the president has done, like the rollback in regulations, or just a sense of optimism because coal has a proponent in the White House as opposed to an adversary? Everyone with whom we spoke, from the university experts to the people in center of town and the coal miners themselves, say it's more about the optimism. Bret, back to you.
Mike Tobin in Kentucky. Mike, thank you. The days of the short bench on the highest court may be coming to an end. Monday is the start of confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justice nominee Neil Gorsuch to replace Justice Antonin Scalia, who died last February. But what will the hearings actually look like? Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream has a preview.
He will uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States.
It's something Judge Neil Gorsuch himself vowed to do the night his Supreme Court nomination was rolled out in prime time.
I pledge that if I am confirmed, I will do all my powers permit to be a faithful servant of the Constitution and laws of this great country.
It's no surprise, though, advocacy groups on the left and the right are split on that proposition as they ramp up their arguments and ads ahead of confirmation hearings for Gorsuch, which kick off on Monday.
Donald Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch, doesn't respect the Constitution.
Always applying the Constitution just as it was written.
Gorsuch is about to face his critics head on as he goes before the Senate Judiciary Committee, where Democrats are vowing to make his charted path to the high court less than smooth.
If he shows in his answers that he is out of the mainstream, as his opinions indicate that he may well be, I will use every tool available, including the filibuster, to oppose him.
Pro-choice advocates are actively sounding the alarm over where Gorsuch may stand on the issue of abortion, given President Trump's assurances that he would choose a pro-life nominee.
Certainly, President Trump's litmus test makes it seem as if, in order to get selected in the first place, he already has his mind made up.
Gorsuch supporters believe he'll be hard to trip up, no matter how heated the hearings may get.
Look, there are going to be people who are ideologically opposed to this nomination come hell or high water, and I think in this case, once the American public sees Judge Gorsuch up there in the Senate testifying, they'll realize what a terrific nomination this is.
When asked about the possibility of invoking the so-called nuclear option, which would lower the vote threshold needed to move a Supreme Court nominee forward from 60 to just 51 votes, a number of senators from both sides of the aisle have expressed the hope it will not come to that, but GOP leadership is not ruling it out. Bret?
Shannon, thank you. See you Monday. Mark your calendars for Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, when Shannon Bream and I will host a special edition of America's Newsroom covering the start of the Gorsuch hearings. I'll be back at 6 o'clock for a special report that night with a full review of those must-watch hearings. Up next, the All-Star panel joins me to break down the President Trump, Angela Merkel news conference and all that was inside. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 8 in Greensboro, North Carolina, where a 5-alarm fire broke out in downtown Raleigh. The flames started in an abandoned building, engulfed 10 other structures, and caused a crane to collapse. After a 7-hour fight, the fire was extinguished. The cause is not known. Fox 25 in Boston with the first full day of jury deliberations in a case of a pharmacist accused of causing a deadly meningitis outbreak. Barry Cadden is facing 25 counts of second-degree murder for carelessly shipping tainted steroids, causing an outbreak that killed 64 people. If convicted, Cadden faces life in prison. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate Fox 5. The big story there tonight, Fifth Avenue, filled with revelers for the 256th annual St. Patrick's Day Parade. The first march in Manhattan was held 14 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It was held in 1762. Today, New York Mayor Andrew Cuomo joined in marching with state troopers. This year's parade honored Catholic Charities and the New York State Police. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
No matter how.
Do you think it was a mistake to blame British intelligence for this? And by the way, my second question, are there from time to time tweets that you regret?
Probably wouldn't be here right now, but very seldom. We have a tremendous group of people that listen, and I can get around the media when the media doesn't tell the truth, so I like that. As far as wiretapping, I guess, by this past administration, at least we have something in common, perhaps. All we did was quote a certain very talented legal mind who was the one responsible for saying that on television. I didn't make an opinion on it.
Well, President Trump, referring to Judge Andrew Napolitano, senior judicial analyst here at Fox News, who over the past few days has said this.
So 3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News that President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA, he didn't use the CIA, he didn't use the FBI, and he didn't use the Department of Justice. He used GCHQ. They have 24/7 access to the NSA database. So by simply having 2 people go to them saying, President Obama needs transcripts of conversations involving candidate Trump, conversations involving President-elect Trump, he's able to get it. And there's no American fingerprints on this.
We love the judge. We love him here at Fox. But the Fox News division was never able to back up those claims and was never reported on this show on Special Report. The British government issued a statement today after Sean Spicer read that report from the podium. We've made clear to the administration that these claims are ridiculous and they should be ignored, and we've received assurances that these allegations will not be repeated. With that, we'll start there with the panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor for The Washington Times. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Charlie, the White House is now citing a number of things. They're not talking about specific evidence. They're citing news reports and obviously a report by Judge Andrew Napolitano that we couldn't back up.
Right. And, honestly, from the beginning with the first tweet and the follow-up tweets from the president on that otherwise sleepy Saturday morning, it was clear from the beginning he was referring to news reports. He was referring to an online news report about the FISA warrants. one that was denied and one that was accepted, approved. And then he was also talking about some of the other surveillance. It was clearly not wiretapping, but other types of surveillance that was written about in the New York Times and the Washington Post. All of those, none of that reporting has been debunked. It is
it has actually. I mean, you have the statement by the DOJ that they've complied with all the information, and then you have the House and Senate Intelligence Committees saying they didn't have any indication that there was a FISA on Trump Tower.
But none of the people that reported those things, including the New York Times, have come back and said corrected their reporting. Is what I mean by that.
But you know the whole back and forth. I mean, the president tweeting, he has access to all the intelligence agencies. They all report to him. He could pick up the phone and find out the real information.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, this is I think the biggest legitimate charge against him is the fact that you do have access to this information. But on the other hand, can you imagine if he did do that? The media goes crazy over this. Imagine what would happen if he did do that and he demanded that these FISA records were made public, which of course he could do, and I wish he would. I think it would be, it would either prove him wrong or prove him right, but at least it would be, it would prove that he is interested in getting at the truth.
Well, he says something else is coming out in the next couple of weeks, is what he told Tucker Carlson. We'll see what that is. Maybe the bottom line here is we are now at 2 weeks of dealing with this issue where there's a lot of things that are going on around the world.
Right. It was really amazing to watch him with Chancellor Merkel today, not only refusing to give her a handshake in the Oval Office, but at that press conference when this wiretap discussion is going on, which isn't an international embarrassment. And then they bring up the Brits being, the intelligence service for the Brits being, this administration leveling a false allegation at them. And then two administration officials, H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor, and the spokesperson, Sean Spicer, reports out this morning, apologized to two separate British officials over this. And then later on today, Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, said, no, we didn't apologize. And when Trump was asked about it at the press conference, his response was very dismissive, and he basically said, you'll just have to talk to Fox. There was no concern about the alliance, the appearance of this false allegation and apology. Even if he didn't use the word apology, there was a way to handle that moment, and it was really demonstrative of sort of how he looks at our alliances, the international order, processes,
or how
protocol.
about this? This is how President Trump has always dealt with challenges to anything, is to push
I just
back.
say that the job requires something else.
This president is different than other presidents.
This job in those moments with allies requires something else.
Because they see it. And
every word matters, every action, the conduct of your staff. It's not to be blown off.
All right, Charles, quickly, I want to turn to NATO. Do you have something on this?
Well, this is just, it's a farce now. The idea that we have in this town, the media, the agencies, the Congress are running around chasing their tails on a story that everyone knows is not true, but having to pretend that it might be because he's the president when we know how it's going to end. And the one thing about the HGHQ, we've got a lot of real enemies in the world. Do we really have to go around antagonizing our best allies?
We will cover it every step of the way, no matter what happens. We'll follow the facts. The president and the chancellor talking about NATO and the messages delivered there. Take a listen.
I reiterated to Chancellor Merkel my strong support for NATO. Many nations owe vast sums of money from past years, and it is very unfair to the United States. These nations must pay what they owe.
So I was gratified to know that the President underlined how important he thinks NATO is. NATO is of prime importance for us, and it was not without very good reason that we said during our summit meeting in Wales that also Germany needs to increase its expenditure.
You know, Charlie, people have talked about it for a long time, many administrations, about what other countries need to do to not have paper armies in NATO. It seemed like the message was strength, and we have, from our White House team, sources with direct knowledge of the meeting describing it as contentious, with President Trump pressing hard against the chancellor to own up to their responsibilities for NATO and defense spending. White House source saying this will be a shot across the bow for other NATO members who have also not offered the 2% GDP, gross domestic product line.
But of course, originally, you know, Donald Trump got into a lot of trouble during the campaign by raising this issue in the first place, because it suggested that, according to the press, that he did not value NATO. Clearly, he does value NATO, and he values it enough that he is going to insist that Germany pay up their fair share. Which and there are reports out of the White House that it appears that they are moving in that direction, which is a very good positive step.
I want to play one more soundbite. Donald Trump, the president, on health care from the Oval Office, quickly.
I just want to let the world know I am 100% in favor. These folks, and they are tough, and they love their constituents, and they love this country. These folks were no's, mostly no's.
Yes, that's correct.
Yesterday. And now every single one is a yes. And I just want to thank you. We're going to have a health care plan that's going to be second to none. It's going to be great. And the people will see that.
So if anybody thought, AB, that the president wasn't signing on to Paul Ryan's efforts, Speaker of the House, he is. That's the Republican Study Group. He says they've all turned. Is this a changing tide?
It was very important that he get out there and say he's 100% behind the bill. Republicans have been very nervous about which page he's on, and that was a very big, symbolic but substantive step, and it will help the bill. It helps that he turned some Republican Study Group conservatives into yeses. It does not mean that there are other conservatives that are not staying in the way of the bill. It's like the numbers in the high teens. They can only lose 21 or 22. They're near 20 right now if you combine some moderates with House Freedom Caucus members. So he's got some way to go, but that's a very good start.
All right, next up, the lightning round. Secretary of State to Asia, and a look at the confirmation hearings coming ahead Monday. Stay with us.
Discussing, are these options on the table, nuclearization of the peninsula, as was discussed during the campaign?
Well, we are exchanging views, as I did in Japan with Prime Minister Abe. This afternoon I'll be exchanging views with the leadership of the Republic of Korea as well as to our views on various approaches that can be taken.
But not ruling out either of those options, sir?
Nothing has been taken off the table.
Nothing has been taken off the table. Secretary of State in the demilitarized zone between South and North Korea there. Our own Rich Edson getting that interview. We haven't heard a lot from the Secretary of State. This was a big moment. We're back with the panel. We'll start there in the lightning round. Charles, significant what he said today in messaging.
Yes, when you say nothing is off the table, you haven't said anything new. That was said by all administrations. But when you add, which he did, the era of strategic patience is over. That was the theme of the Obama administration, and perhaps you might even say the Bush administration. Strategic patience, meaning the regime is doomed, it can't sustain itself, we're going to wait, we're not going to go to war, we're not going to threaten. The regime understood that in Pyongyang, and they have therefore pushed ahead. When we say that era is over, that means only two things. Either we're going to advocate or support the nuclearization of South Korea, and Japan will follow, or we're going to shoot them down or hit their bases. And the audience for this is not the regime in North Korea. It's China. China are the ones who would be moved by either of those threats, and they are the key. But I think that is a real shift in our policy. It's going to have, if it's going to have any effect, it's going to be that rather than what we've done for the last 8 years.
I mean, addressing nuclearization of the peninsula, just the messaging of that is significant.
And that's really what he's talking about proceeding with. He basically said no more payments, no more multi-country negotiations, no more. And so what does that mean? It means if we're not going to do a preemptive strike, it means the pressures on China to come on board as we weaponize South Korea and Japan. And I really hope he has the posture and he's going to be effective with the Chinese, that he's actually telegraphing. And I don't know how much the Chinese respect or fear President Trump at this point. If you look at the tweet he sent today, I mean, we'll see. But I hope Tillerson is going to be as effective with the Chinese as he's telegraphed.
All right, the big thing Monday, we'll have full coverage of the Gorsuch hearings, the confirmation hearings. Is your sense, Charlie, that there still will be this big Democratic pushback against his nomination?
Well, there has to be a fight, and a significant fight of some sort. The problem from the beginning for Democrats has been, it's the establishment Democrats, elected Democrats versus their base. Their base is just, they're dug in about this nomination, and so Democrats their backs are up against the wall. They're going to have to make a good effort of fighting this, but I think in the end, Gorsuch's background and assuming he does well, and based on what we've seen so far, I think he probably will do very well in the hearings. It's going to be very difficult for them to actually mount a challenge.
Senator Schumer told me not a single Democrat has come out for him. Most have come out against him. He would not address whether the nuclear option has to be used.
I thought Schumer's response to you was a very muted one. I think he understands that this guy is out of central casting. This is a Gary Cooper character. You don't. Attacking him is a losing proposition. There'll be a lot of noise, a lot of appeasing of the base. But in the end, they're not going to risk the nuclear option. They're going to save that for the next nomination, which could be one that would swing the court for a generation.
Which could be Justice Kennedy as early as this summer. After a quick break, the all-star panelists, winners and losers from a busy week.